Well, I am going to go ahead and get us started this afternoon. Well, good afternoon. I pray that everyone is well. My name is Rhonda Anderson, and I serve as President and CEO of the YMCA of Greensboro. It has been a delight to partner with Ivan Canada and the NCCJ of the Piedmont Triad in hosting now our sixth session of the 846 series. For our returning friends, thank you for continuing to partner with us as we endeavor to provide an opportunity for our community to have continued dialogue around the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I would ask also, if you're joining us, if you would please mute your line so that we don't have any feedback or noise. So if you're joining us, please mute your line. So if you're joining us for the first time, thank you for connecting with us. And I invite you to check out the past 846 webinars, which can be found on the YMCA of Greensboro's website. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. It is because of their generosity that we're able to provide these series to you free of charge. And so that includes Liberty Hardware, S.J. Edwards Foundation, United Healthcare, Weaver Foundation, Contour Brands, the Women's Professional Forum, First Bank, Cone Health Foundation, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, American Bank and Trust, SunTrust, BB&T, now Truist, and Triad Adult and Pediatric Medicine. So Karen, if you could take that screen share off, that would be helpful. Okay. And so we are grateful for their continued support. Today's session, unconscious bias. And so we got feedback from our previous webinars, and this is one of the topics that was right at the top in terms of people wanting to have additional conversation and dialogue. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to do so today. So we will explore how our identities shape our unconscious biases, the assumptions that we all make about people, usually without ever realizing that we're doing it. We'll look at our body's nervous system and how our brain works together to form these biases, and learn some practices how we can mitigate these unintended feelings. And so this is going to be a working session. And before I introduce our speaker, Michael Robinson, I'd like to mention that we named the 846 series, and this is primarily for those who are new to this. We named the series for the 8 minutes and 46-second period in which the former officer's knee was on George Floyd's neck. And as we learned, that officer's knee was in fact pressed against Mr. Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So we felt important to acknowledge that fact. So our speaker, you're in for a treat today. Michael Robinson has served as program director at NCCJ of the Piedmont Triad in Greensboro, North Carolina since 2017, where he designs and facilitates programs that raise awareness of the intersection between identity and bias, builds capacity for holding difficult conversations related to diversity. He has worked with several organizations across the state of North Carolina and the United States, including Liberty Hardware, United Way of Forsyth County, the North Carolina Bar Association, to name a few. Michael holds a master's in peace and conflict studies from UNC Greensboro. And in 2016, he founded Shifting Lenses, a workshop series that brings people from all walks of life together to discuss divisive issues, learn communication skills, and build community knowledge in public spaces. And before I turn this over to Michael, just a few housekeeping items. We will have opportunity to have some questions and some dialogue. And so if you have a question, you can place that in the Q&A section. If you want to comment, please do so in our chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So at this point, I'll turn this over to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Karen. And thanks everybody for joining this afternoon. I'm grateful to be with you to talk about a subject that I am ever learning more and more about. And so this was an opportunity for me to continue that learning on my own as well. So thank you. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement of the land that we are joining this call from. Earlier this week, we celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's ever more important in this work that we acknowledge that we are that we have a long history of bias informing our actions and decisions, and the outcomes of people's lives being drastically impacted by them. North Carolina still has the largest Native population east of the Mississippi. And this land that I'm sitting on today once belonged to the Occaneechi, the Sissepaha, the Kiawe, band of the Saponi peoples. And these people are still here. And I would like to honor them and all our ancestors who endowed us with the DNA to be resilient enough to be having these conversations today and on into the future. I know we have many friends on the call today, but for those who are not familiar with NCCJ, we are a human relations organization that has called the Triad home for over 80 years. We work primarily in bringing folks together from different walks of life, different cultures, races, religions, in an effort to build compassionate and just communities through conversation. Because we believe change starts with conversation. Conversations build community, and when people respect and know how to communicate with others who are different from them, everyone benefits. So I'm grateful to be program director and in that work. So today's session, we're going to be talking about unconscious bias. And I know some of you are like, okay, another unconscious bias workshop. I've done this before, and you're probably right. This concept has grown a lot of traction, and people are more aware of it, have become more aware of the last few years. There's lots of TED Talks, books, podcasts, things like that about unconscious bias. But there's a growing body of research that's informing how we understand unconscious bias, what influences it, and what we can do to lessen its impact on our decision-making and our behaviors. I want to say at the outset, I'm not an expert on unconscious bias, but I am grateful. And I want to especially start off by thanking the elders and researchers in the field of psychology, sociology, and neuroscience, whose research has greatly informed this presentation, and without it wouldn't be possible. So as we go through the next hour or so, we're going to touch on this concept in three parts. The first is going to ground us in bias. I'm going to do a brief overview of unconscious bias, which we can really think about as an umbrella term for a variety of biases. I'm going to define a few biases that we frequently encounter, and talk about some real world examples. The second part, we're going to look at the brain, how it's structured, and how it works together with our body to help produce bias responses. And lastly, we're going to touch on debiasing and mindfulness techniques that we can employ to regulate our body and help change our mind. That's sort of long-term work, and we'll talk about that when we get there. We begin all our programs with operating assumptions, right? These are things that we assume of everybody in the space, and I like to offer them for us as well. I assume that everybody in the space is a good person, that we're all good people, that we believe that everyone deserves to live and work in safe, welcoming, and inclusive environments, and that we all have something to offer, and we all have something to learn. And I would add that we all have a responsibility to help to create those sorts of spaces for each and every one of us. Today's session is not going to solve all the issues of the world. You're not going to come away not having bias anymore. That you'll probably come away better understanding that there's really all we can really do is mitigate our biases, be aware of them, as opposed to eradicating them. None of what I share today is to place shame, blame, or guilt. It's more so, again, to orient us to how we are in the world, how we show up, and what we can do to better align our practices with our values. And the main purpose is for us all to learn, think, imagine, and grow together. That's my favorite author and mentor, James Baldwin, says, this is the only hope society has, and this is the only way societies change. And I would say change for the positive. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to be clear at the start that having bias doesn't make you a bad person. In fact, having bias is a sure sign that you are human and that you have the skills necessary to function effectively in the world. We say often in our program, if you have a brain, you have bias. A bias is natural. It's a shortcut that our brain uses to help us feel safe and avoid danger. In an ever more diverse world, the likelihood that we're going to encounter people or ideas that are unfamiliar to us is increasing tremendously. And in order to continue to function in that society and connect and be inclusive, we have to learn how to discern true danger from perceived danger. For the rest of the workshop today, this session, I want you to think about bias in terms of safety and danger. Often we might think about, or we've been conditioned to think about bias as a thought that we have about others, ideas, situations. And while it is often expressed in thoughts and words, it begins as sensations and vibrations and images that are subject to our unconscious processing. It literally is happening outside of our conscious brain, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So our responsibility is learning how to regulate the parts of the body that fire impulsively to maintain our conscious, inclusive, and connected responses. That's how we build community. That's what we do as humans. That's what makes us human. Most of us are probably familiar with the idea of bias. And when we think about bias, we think about prejudice, we think about discrimination, we think about treating somebody unfairly because of an aspect of their identity, or treating somebody favorably because of an aspect of their identity. You might find that you have a particular preference for someone based on the fact that they share the same political beliefs as you, or they went to the same college, or they grew up in the same area as you. You may also find that you don't really like people who are from different political backgrounds, or you may not, you don't like people who gossip. It's these sorts of things, right? So those are like declared biases that I know I have. I know that I'm aware of these things. I know I have these feelings. And they can be about individuals, groups, institutions, really doesn't matter. And the form we're talking about today, of course, is unconscious bias. Those are the attitudes and stereotypes that affect understanding, actions, and decisions unconsciously. They're those tendencies that we are often not aware of that make us feel positively or negatively about people, ideas, situations, based on implied association. So I make an assumption about somebody based off of the race I think they belong to, or again, the political class I believe they ascribe to. So in essence, without me even having to know a person's affiliation, by just looking at them, for instance, I might assume that they're part of a particular group of people. And that's where we have to be careful, because again, we all know about stereotyping and things like this, that these things can get in the way of us building connection, really assessing people's character, getting past our biases is something that we have to be cognizant and intentional about. Those biases, unconscious bias, it develops over the course of our lifetime. And again, we're unaware of them. But lucky for us, our brains are malleable. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what are ways that we can actually relearn and unlearn some of the biases that we acquire over time. So as I said at the start, unconscious bias is more of an umbrella term for different types of biases that pop up in our psyche. So we're going to do a few little exercise that is going to, I'm going to ask you some questions or give you some scenarios, and I want you to, in the chat, answer these questions. Okay. So I'm going to give you a scenario, and you're going to have a choice between 4 different options, 4 different types of bias. And we'll talk about them for a little bit. Okay. So here's the first scenario. Let's say you meet someone out during an outing with your friends. You don't know this person, never met them before. And they're wearing a shirt with the logo of your favorite sports team's rival. Okay. So you think about that, whatever that, I'm a Carolina fan, so this is a person wearing a Duke shirt or hat or something like that, right? You particularly have a disdain for the way the fans of that team treat the players from your team when you play against one another, right? So, hey, if you're Cameron crazy out there, you know how I feel. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Now, and you immediately, without even knowing this person, you just met this person, you feel some type of way about it. You feel, I don't know about this person. I don't know about them. All right. So, is this an example of A, affinity bias, B, confirmation bias, C, diagnosis bias, or D, availability bias? You place your answers in the chats, A, B, C, or D. All right. Seeing a lot of people say it is A. One person said D because I think they saw other people saying A and they were like, I'm gonna choose something different. So smart. Okay, so if actually the answer to this is C, diagnosis bias. Now, it's related to another form of bias that we'll see in a moment, but what we're doing here, diagnosis bias, is when we judge someone based off of our initial first impression or initial feeling, right? So I'm judging this person because I have this feeling about people who belong to this group, and I all of a sudden have a disdain for them. First impression, I see the Duke, I see the little blue devil on the hat, and I'm having some type of feeling, right? So it's a form of a diagnosis bias, diagnosing this person as a Cameron crazy or something like this, right? Now, here's another scenario, similar. You walk into a room that you've never been in before with a relative group of strangers. You look around for a place to sit and you spot a bag sitting next to a chair that has the letters of your alma mater or your sorority or fraternity, or it's simply a bag that looks similar to the one that you're carrying. And you figure that this will be a good place to sit. Have you just exhibited A, affinity bias, B, confirmation bias, C, diagnosis bias, or D, availability bias? All right. Yeah, most people are saying A. Right on. Good job. Yes, affinity bias. So affinity bias is our tendency to gravitate toward and develop relationships with people who are more like ourselves or that share similar interests, right? So without even knowing this person, you might say, "Oh, okay, we have an affiliation. I'm gonna get along with this person. I'm gonna connect with this person." Think for a moment, consider your inner circle for a moment. The people who outside of your immediate family are perhaps the closest to you, the people who you call your road dogs, people who you call up whenever you had a good day at work or you had a bad day at work. Who might those people be? And I want you to think about them in terms of these categories: ability, age, ethnicity, gender, so on and so forth. And what you might find is that the first few people that you chose and you thought about, you might be seeing a lot of your identity reflected back to you, right? These people might be the same age as you or within the same age range. They may be the same race or ethnicity. They may have the same religious affiliation as you. Now, if you feel that, if you find that, yes, my inner circle is reflecting me, right? You're still an open-minded and inclusive person. Don't worry. You know? But unconsciously, your brain is helping you make decisions that will help you stay and maintain a sense of safety, right? So we'll talk about how this works in a moment. We'll talk about the brain, but that tendency, that affinity bias, it doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means it's something that we need to be aware of, especially if we're trying, and especially because it could impact how we engage with folks who are different from us, from different backgrounds, right? Or our desire to want to even engage, especially when we feel stressed, when we feel under pressure. Okay, here's another question for you. So I want you to pick the correct answer in each of the following pairs. Right? It's going to be 3 pairs of options. I want you to choose which is the correct answer. Each year, do more people in the United States die from cause A or cause B? All right, so for the first one, you're going to choose A or B. For the second one, you will choose A or B. For the third one, you'll choose A or B, all right, whichever one you feel is the correct answer. Each year, do more people in the United States die from cause A or B? Here we go. Murder or diabetes? Okay. Most people saying B for that question. How about number 2? Murder or suicide? Some varied answers there. Most people saying B, some A's there too. How about question 3 or choice 3? Car accidents or abdominal cancer? Okay. So I said both, maybe. Okay. Now, thank you for answering that. Now, most of us give the answer B for question 1 and A for questions 2 and 3, when in fact the answer to each question is B. Thank you, Mary. Today, perhaps. So it is our tendency to choose B or A for questions 2 and 3, an example of affinity confirmation, diagnosis, or availability bias. People saying B, D, don't know, right? Okay, C. Okay. Right, so if you answered D, availability bias, you're correct. So I pulled this example from the book Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People, written by the researchers who developed this implicit association test. And they tell us that we're more likely to choose murder or car accidents as an answer because of the frequency that we see them in media, and in regards to car accidents, the shocking nature of the events. Even though abdominal cancer is a common form of cancer is a common cause of death, because murder and car accidents come to mind more easily, we wrongly assume them to occur more frequently, right? So, it's one of the reasons why when we see a fin at the beach, you might think shark first, right? Because you don't hear about dolphin attacks, So, and maybe you've even experienced this in your real life. Maybe you purchase a car and all of a sudden it seems like everybody else is driving that car. And, you thought you're going to be the only person riding around in the desert sand colored Toyota Tacoma, and everybody else now got that color, You thought you were going to be the only one in the cream colored Cadillac. Not everybody got it. Now, it may not be the case. It may not be the case. Maybe the same amount of people driving that car, but because we are now aware of this, right? We are constantly seeing it because it's our vehicle. We're going to see it more often in the real world. Or maybe, for instance, you hear a news story about housing market booming. Next thing you know, it seems like everybody's in your neighborhood is selling their house, right? Again, the day before, it could have been the same amount of for sale signs, but because you heard this news story, it's what is immediately available to you. So when you drive around the neighborhood, you think you're about to get some new neighbors. You probably will, but I'll come back to this particular one in a moment. I have an example to flesh it out. So that's that tendency, again, to see what is more frequently examples of things that come to the mind more readily, even though they don't actually happen more often. Here's the last one for this series, okay? So questions. Now you can relax after this because I don't have any more questions. Some of you might be feeling a little bit of angst about me asking you so many questions, at the start of this. So I'm going to give you a series of numbers, which you see at the bottom of the screen. I'm seeing if I can go back to it. Okay, never mind. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to either propose a set of numbers that you think follows my rule for the sequence that I came up with, or I want you to tell me what you think the rule is that governs my sequence. And so the numbers are 2, 4, and 8. So in the chat, put what you think the answer is. Okay, so I'm seeing some answers. Got 16, 32, 64. Okay, yes, they follow my sequence. 2, 4, 8, 16. That follows my rule. Follows my rule. Okay, I see a lot of answers. Double the last. Each number is double of the one before. Let me see what other answers I got coming in. Double the number times 2. For all you who are saying double the number, that is not my rule. That's not my rule. So see if you can come up with something else. It's not my rule. That's not how I came up with that sequence. See, some other people put in different numbers. 10, 16, 10, 12, 16, 14, 22, 32. Okay, right on. Okay, so here's the thing. All evens, that's not mine. That's not it either. So if you are writing in the chat doubles, that fits, right? 2, 10, if you wrote 10, 20, 40, that works. But if you also say 1, 2, 3, it would also follow my rule. All the numbers simply need to be in ascending order. Now, most of us have set a rule. When you saw the exercise, you saw that what I wanted you to do, you set a rule for yourself without even realizing it. And we're working to have whatever the answer that you came up with, trying to make it fit your rule. Okay. Now, what is this an example of? Is it affinity bias, confirmation bias, diagnosis bias, or availability bias? Some of y'all are like, oh, it has to be this one because it's process of elimination, and you'd be right. Okay. So this is an example, friends, of confirmation bias, where we will pay more attention to information that confirms our existing belief system. So if I set up that, okay, I think that the answer is that the system is that you double every number, I'm going to produce numbers that are doubles, right? Nobody in the sequence put, oh, it's just ascending order. So because we try to find the information that is going to affirm and confirm our belief about the situation. So in essence, if I were to send 2 people with diametrically opposed positions about, say, climate change or the vaccine or whatever bill is being passed in the state legislature, even the same article, they're going to try to attempt to find information within that article that confirms what they already believe. right? It's not even about facts, not even about truth. It's about what I think, okay? And so this is important for us to recognize when we can think about bias, because even a little bit of bias can have big consequences, especially if I already have a set way of thinking about it consciously, and I have these unconscious biases that I'm not aware of, right? I'm going to make decisions that fall in line with what is helping to keep me safe. Because any other way of thinking is dangerous to me, potentially. So let's talk about, okay, so we know, so bias is impacting every decision that we make. Timothy Wilson is a researcher who says that we're taking in 11 million bits of information every moment, but we're only consciously processing 40 bits at a time. So just about every decision that we make, every image that we're able to take in, these sorts of things, anything we're processing consciously is being facilitated and helped by our unconscious brain. But why exactly do we form biases in the first place? As I said over and over again, where I want us to think about this in terms of safety and danger, not just likes and dislikes and preferences, right? The preferences are aligned with what makes us feel comfortable. So those feelings and attitudes that we express based off of past experiences that our brain registers as safe or dangerous, whether or not we've had them, are impacting the decisions that we make. So let's look at how the brain helps facilitate that. Now I'm gonna take y'all to science class for a minute, so stick with me, okay? I am not a science teacher. But we're gonna talk about the brain. Now, if you're like me, when you think about the brain, this is probably the image that comes to mind. It's like this wrinkled mass, this wrinkled organ that is floating in our head. We may refer to it as the mind, you know. We think about it as a thinking tool. It helps us think, helps us ration, helps us reason, and that is certainly the case, right? But the brain's purpose is to ensure our survival. That's what it helped. That's how it developed over time. Its first and its primary purpose is to help us survive. It's neutral. It isn't good or bad. It doesn't have any other motives. It's just simply taking what it receives from the outside world through our body, things we hear, we see, touch, smell, these sorts of things, through our senses, and help us make sense of it. Not even make sense, yes, make sense of it, but also respond to it, react to it, keep us safe. The brain is actually made up of 3 different parts that are in one. That red area you see on the screen, we can call it our lizard brain, right? It's the part of the brain that developed first, evolutionarily speaking. And it's connected to our spinal cord, and that is what helps keep our bodies functioning. Basic functions, eating, sleeping, waking, crying, breathing, are all facilitated by this region of the brain. It's the reason why when somebody passes out or goes unconscious, they're still able to breathe, right? They don't stop breathing necessarily because of that, because we don't have to think to breathe. You ever think about that? You don't have to think to feel hungry. It just happens, you know. Then we get a thought, because our brain's purpose is to help us survive, right? So I think, oh, my stomach rumbles. I need to get a sandwich, you know, because my brain has registered what makes that feeling go away, that sensation. Oh, food does. So I need to seek out food. Right, it is working alongside our brain. That the limbic system, that orange area you see there, is common to all mammals, all groups of people that, or groups of mammals that live in groups, so like wolf packs, you know, like deer, these sorts of things. Anything that those that nurture their young have this area of the brain, and together, these two, we can call them our emotional brain. I know this slide says emotional brain, but these are the ones that are helping us react to the outside world, right? Helps us discern what's dangerous, what's pleasurable. Its sole purpose is to get us moving in a particular direction to either attain something that's going to be for our benefit or avoid something that is going to be dangerous to us. Okay. These areas of the brain help, especially the limbic system, impacts what we choose to eat, where we sleep, who we like and dislike. And it isn't thinking for us. Its purpose isn't to think. It is to move us in the direction of things that have often in our experience led to pleasure, led to feelings of comfort, feelings of ease, so on and so forth, right? Now that green area, the part of the brain that we think about, when we think about the mind, we think about us thinking, when I keep saying think, that is taken care of by the neocortex, right? That's that area of the brain that helps us process language, helps us manage our time. It is the thing that helps us imagine, and it helps us plan for the future. So I can think about a circumstance where, like, what happens if I lose my job? I can think about a sequence of events in that regard. I can also think about the consequences of me not paying my rent, right? So having that portion of the brain is what makes us human, but it's also the part of the brain that developed last. And it's also the part of the brain that comes online last whenever we are in any situation where we may be feeling some type of stress or discomfort or unease. So imagine, for instance, you are driving. I know y'all been here before. I've been here before. You're driving, lying in bed, and you feel something crawling up your leg. Now, before you know it, that signal from your leg goes up to your brain stem, and you out of the bed, and you pull over to the car, and you start to wipe your leg, and then you realize, oh, it was the lanyard from my keys, or it was a piece of hair, a string from my sock that was causing that, right? Now, why didn't you know better in that situation? Well, that's because those the bottom 2/3 of your brain, that lizard brain and the limbic system, they go online first, and they activate these pre-programmed escape plans. We gotta get out of here. That's a spider. It's gonna bite me, right? I might not even be consciously afraid of spiders. I might even consciously be worried about. I may be in a very safe and contained environment, but my pre-programmed fight, flight, or freeze responses are going to override my conscious thinking, which leaves us to just have to sit with ourselves in perhaps embarrassment or shame or whatever. But he's like, oh wow, I just did that. I just freaked out. That was just it was just my hair tickling the back of my. And then I don't have that problem, but some people have that problem. I don't have that tickle the back of my neck issue. So anytime that we experience something that's unexpected, imagine that you get a phone call from your mother or a loved one saying that one of your favorite family members has passed away suddenly, or you hear a siren from a police car coming up, getting closer and closer behind you, or you get an email that starts with "per my last email." That gets me, that stresses me out personally. That's a personal example. The first reaction is, am I safe? It isn't, why they say it's, am I safe? And that feeling helps precipitate whatever comes afterwards. I might, if I register that feeling as danger more and more, then I might form a bias about that individual, or I might not prefer that situation, right? So I might dread every time my mom calls, even though she's maybe just calling to say hi, because of that one time or I might panic every time I hear sirens, even on the TV. I might form a judgment about somebody who starts emails that way, for my last email, even though I don't know the person, even though it's a perfectly reasonable way to write an email. So it's important to recognize that it isn't just our thinking. It isn't just that I feel this way. It's that my body is reacting to what I am receiving. And if in the past, those messages, a message like that has meant that somebody was upset with me. The phone call means that I'm going to get bad news. The person who's wearing this type of shirt belongs to this political party. An individual who dresses like that acts this way. My body is registering, do we think that this person is safe, or do we think this person is dangerous? So alongside that, while the brain is doing this thing up here, it has to be connected to the body somehow, right? So it's connected to the brainstem. And at the same time that we are we're receiving these signals, we're actually, everything that we're receiving, as I said earlier, is coming through the body. It can't get to the brain but through the body. So it's when we hear something, when we see something, when we feel something. That's why I said earlier, it's about sensations, vibes, images, right? That we have these associations with, that we have to be aware of. So there's two areas here that we're going to talk about. One is the parasympathetic system, right? That's that area that is triggered whenever we feel danger. We feel our heartbeat races, our lungs, we start to take shallow breaths. We may feel our extremities start to tingle because our body is starting to, blood starting to move into the vital organs. Then we have the sympathetic branch, right? This is those yellow dots that you see that are connected to the stomach, the gut. When we talk about having a gut feeling, right, our stomach churns, or we feel our stomach drop, or our heart drop, it's because our heart rate's dropping. That's why we feel those feelings. Butterflies in our stomachs, it's because there are more neurons in our gut than there are in our brain. And that area of our body developed at the same time as the brain, right? So from the bottom up, the same way, rather, from the bottom up. So whenever we're in a situation where we feel safe, we feel comfortable, we feel like we can connect and engage, right? The branches of what's known as the vagus nerve, or the wandering nerve, that are connected to our nose, our eyes, our ears, we can orient towards people. That's why we nod when we agree with somebody. We be feeling something, you start to nod, right? It's because you're comfortable, you're calm. Like, yeah, okay, I can vibe with this. Whenever we feel distant, or you start to feel the feeling of like, ooh, unease, you start to feel that heat come across your body. That's your body responding to something that you don't necessarily align with, perhaps, or you don't agree with, and your body's preparing you for fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. Deb Dana, who has talks extensively about this idea of polyvagal theory, says that we can look at this like a ladder, right? So when I'm at the top of the ladder, I feel safe, I'm socially engaged, I might feel like I can see into the future, I feel organized, I want to engage with others, I can take care of myself. But as we move down, let's say something happens in our day, like we fear losing our job. We hear that there's going to be job cuts in our industry. The car won't start this morning, I'm late for work. We hear an unfamiliar sound in the bushes, right? We start to move down that ladder. We might feel agitated, or we might feel agitated or frantic or frustrated. I can't get this door open. The last part, now, if any that we're ever experiencing something where we can escape, so we're in a job that we feel like we can't leave because we have to provide for our kids, it's the only way we can do that, or I'm in a situation where I'm physically bound, or even if you think about historically speaking, like our ancestors who perhaps were not able to get out of bondage, right? There's a sense that we can, the potential for us to fall down into this area of numb, collapse, and shutdown as possible. It's perhaps when you get sad news and you feel like you can't eat. Imagine, right? That's a protective mechanism that's happening in your gut, right? When we feel that danger is all over the place, I'll speak for myself. Last summer, Michael Robinson right here felt in this area of the ladder for weeks after George Floyd died. There's a number of things going on personally, professionally, that put me in a state of inability to cope. I couldn't climb back up the ladder. I couldn't see a way out, right? I didn't want to leave my house. I didn't want to see anybody. Didn't want to talk on the phone. Everything was dangerous to me. Somebody in the street stopped me and told me to be safe to walk against traffic. And I saw it as a personal affront. Person put me in danger, right? So it's important for us to recognize that all these things that are happening, it's not a bad thing. It's not bad that we respond these ways. It's the way that our body has prepared over time and has developed over time to keep us safe. We should actually praise the body for doing this, for putting us in a space where we feel that we can recover so that we can eventually climb up that ladder, right? So let's take a trip down the ladder, right? So let's imagine this in our real world. You're driving to work in the morning, listening to your radio, you got your coffee going, right? Everything's popping, everything's good. So you're probably at the top of the ladder. Maybe it's a Friday. You're at the top of the ladder. And then all of a sudden you hear sirens coming up behind you, they're getting faster and faster, right? I might move down into the middle rungs of the ladder. Maybe feel like, was I speeding? You might slow down, look at your speedometer. Did I do something wrong? And did I pay my registration? So your heart starts to race. You start to feel heat, all these feelings, these sensations in the body. Then you pull over. The police car rushes past you. Whew, okay. So we're all ready. You see, I took a breath. I'm safe. I can start to climb back up the ladder. Begin to return to a normal speed. I'm moving up the ladder. I get to work. I've forgotten about the situation. Everything's good. Now, I might not even be aware, because a situation like that got over pretty quick. I may not even be aware of what my body is doing to help me regulate in that situation, right? That my heartbeat increased to help me prepare for something that could be potentially a danger. My breath changed. I was able to slow down and afterwards recollect, regulate, take a deep breath, right? So the body's doing that automatically. And so whenever we're in a situation where we feel we perceive bias, we perceive someone who is suspicious, we feel that we need to protect ourselves, protect our interests, protect our ideas, protect our lives. It's important that we can take those same natural tendencies and use them as resources to regulate our bodies and change our minds. So I want to pause here and just take a breath, everybody. I know that was a lot to take in, a lot. There's a lot to say there. I've spoken a lot in terms of individual experiences that we might have that we download and we associate. We create these associations. Our brain catalogs for us. But our brains also have these things called mirror neurons, right? I remember I was talking earlier about how we orient towards someone, we'll nod and we agree. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but if somebody else yawns, all of a sudden you'll yawn. If you're having coffee with somebody and they lean back in their chair, maybe you know that you start to lean back in your chair, right? that's because we are social beings, and our mirror neurons reflect what we see, right? That's why when somebody is around you and they're fidgety, you might be like, "You're making me nervous," because they are. they're actually, their vibrations are being sent to you, and they're making you nervous. They're making your body respond too, right? That energy is being distributed in that way. We are social beings, and one researcher says that our brains are cultural tools. You know, we learned how to be and survive in groups. And so if something happens to somebody that belongs to the group that I belong to, a family member gets hurt, somebody who belongs to the racial group that I align myself with, there's speech or there's action that's taken toward my people, whoever those people might be. When we can experience those things in a very visceral way, our brain really doesn't know the difference. All it does is cataloging for us what is safe and what's not. So our biases are often shaped without us even having to be in proximity to danger or proximity to mistreatment or harm. We can just have ideas that have been passed down, stories that are passed down that inform how we respond in situations that seem real. So just like the body can regulate itself, we can practice techniques and tools to help keep ourselves steady enough to move into conscious decision making. Right. So we'll talk about those in the last few minutes we have here. One technique that is talked about in the research of folks at the Department of Psychology at University of Wisconsin is stereotype replacement. So sometimes people will ask, like, okay, so how do I change my thinking about people who are, of a different culture or something like this? And quite honestly, there's really no workaround. The workaround is having and facilitating experiences where we can be around folks who are different from us. Right? That's really the best way to change our experience in that way. One thing that we have to do is be vigilant and true about the biases that we hold, right? There's the implicit association test, a number of different exercises that we can do to help us become aware of our preferences. And as I said, we're all good people, and it can be difficult sometimes for us to admit this, but the more that we can detect when and be honest about ourselves when we do have a biased idea, instead of pushing it away and saying, "Oh, that's not me. I can't believe I thought that." No, you did think that. I did think that. Just be real, be honest. I thought that. Reflect on, why is it that I think that? You know what? I don't think I actually know anybody from that region of the world. So why would I think that about them? Because I know that they're from X place. Where'd that come from? And seek out ways to reject it in the future. Not to put yourself in harm's way, but to say, what might I need to do to provide my mind and my brain with other options moving forward? Brene Myers, in a TED Talk that she is, millions of people have seen her TED Talk on unconscious bias. And during the background, she shows a bunch of images of Black people in the background. She says, "You know why I'm doing this? I'm doing this because the more that you see positive images of Black people, the more you'll have them available in your mind. So next time you see somebody walking down the street, you may think something different, right? Than we all have been conditioned to feel or think, right? So we can do things like that. We can practice this. Another thing that we might do is, again, I love this acronym, PAUSE. Howard Ross, who wrote the book Everyday Bias, has this mnemonic where we pay attention to what we're feeling, right? So again, we just acknowledge it, we pause, we think about what's beneath that judgment. we acknowledge or identify our reaction, our interpretation, our judgment, right? So I'm interpreting the situation as X. Why is that? I acknowledge that I'm doing that. I'm being honest with myself. I try to understand other possible reactions. How else could I have responded to this? Because there's other options for me to respond. I don't have to stay here, right? I can search for constructive and empowering or productive ways to deal with the situation, right? So, I may call a friend and say, hey, this happened to me today. Can we talk about it? Have you ever experienced somebody doing this to you? So I can get an experience, right? But remember, do that with people you know. you have a friend that is okay with you doing that. Don't just call that one coworker of yours who you don't really ever talk to. And execute your action plan, right? Put it into action, put it into work. Now, these don't work if we're not doing it all the time, right? It's about practice. Allen Iverson said, we talk about practice. Mindfulness is something else that we can ever more make a part of our practice. So, there's a lot of stuff out there about mindfulness as well, and I love it all. Read it all, watch it all, right? But the only thing that you can read all day long, you can watch TED Talks and things on YouTube about it, but practicing it is really key. All mindfulness is being aware of what's going on inside. How does what is happening outside of us informing what's happening on the inside, and bringing perspective and awareness to those feelings, naming what's affecting us. Brene Brown, praise Brene, says that when we name and own hard things, it doesn't give the hard things power, it gives us power, right? So honoring the fact that, hey, racism sucks. It's hard being me out here, whatever it is. Acknowledge that. That's affecting you. Don't push it away. Consider your emotions. How's that making you feel? Let them in. Let anger in. Sit down with anger. Sit down with frustration. Sit down with hopelessness. Pay attention to what it's doing to you. Connect with it. Because it's happening regardless of whether or not you acknowledge it. So might as well acknowledge it. Just be with our emotions. Practice that. Doesn't mean we have to stay there. The great thing about this is that we're using our actual experience as a resource that we can tap into whenever we are in situations where we are, in fact, encountering somebody that we don't agree with. We feel our bodies shaking. We feel that uneasiness. We can put ourselves in situations when we feel safe, when we feel calm, when we feel comfort to practice those feelings, because we know, hey, we can get out of it. Right? So you can see this NCCJ acronym comes in handy. Name what's affecting you, consider your emotions, connect with them, and just be with them. Practice that from time to time. I would say daily, if you can. You can stand it. And grounding in the body. If you know me, you know that one of my heroes in this work, and somebody that I look up to tremendously, is Reverend Minicum, whose book, My Grandmother's Hands, which talks about racialized trauma and how we heal through our bodies, talks about the importance of seeing the body as the resource for healing and reconnecting. That it's not about our thoughts so much. Like, we might think we have mind over matter, or that we can will ourselves out of biased thinking. But our body, as another book says, keeps the score. Okay, so we have a long and collective history of trauma, and maybe not individual trauma, collective communal trauma that we have to be aware of, that is informing how we show up in the world, how we feel when we're in rooms with people who aren't like us. Or when we finally realize, oh, that friend of mine who I've known for 25 years thinks differently than I thought they thought. We can learn and practice orienting to our surroundings, You can do it right now. You can look around your room, notice the height of the ceiling, look behind you, notice the exits, the windows. Know that you're safe. Do it in every room you enter, all the time. Become aware of your body and what happens whenever you encounter feelings of prejudice, feelings of bias. Don't push them away. You may tremble. You may rock. You may start to hum all of a sudden. Those are resources that we can pull from whenever we feel distress, whenever we feel unease, whenever we want to make a judgment about somebody. Instead of me going there, I can slow myself down and I can use the resources that my body naturally does. I rock. Whenever I feel nervous, I start to bounce my knees. I start to when I was a kid, I was afraid of the dark, And so if I had to walk home, I would all of a sudden start singing, like humming a song or singing a song. Now we might see that as distraction, but it's actually us engaging that parasympathetic nervous system. It's us vibrating the vagus nerve. So humming, laughing, rocking, and resting are all things that we can do. Getting a good night's sleep. That's that. Though it's not just good for the brain; it's good for the body. It's good for the mind. And so, I'm grateful for you all being here, and I know that this may have been a different angle on the topic of unconscious bias, but I felt it was important for us to think about this connection between our thoughts and our bodies, and seeing this as an instrument. Our bodies aren't against us. Our minds aren't against us. Everything is for us. And so the more that we can see it as resource and say, oh, okay, I get to learn more about myself, and that is going to help me engage more and more the way that I intend to in the world. Because if we can't get there unless we be honest with ourselves. One more thing I want to talk about is breath. So whenever we feel distress, we may feel a sense of like our breath gets short. Focusing on our exhale, longer exhale, triggers for the body that we're safe, right? Like when Scooby-Doo and Shaggy run away from the ghost and they pause, that deep breath triggers to the mind and the body, we're safe. So the more we practice these things, I'm saying practice over and over again, because it takes practice for them to become regular parts of our experience. That allows us to continue to foster and create a world where there's compassion, there's empathy, and we move towards peace. We're in unprecedented times, y'all. We don't even know about tomorrow. We may think we do, but we don't. We're in unprecedented times every moment of the day. And we think because we live in these nice houses and we drive in cars, streets that have stoplights, and we know what side of the street to go, and we come up with all these rules. We still are very much vulnerable to the unknown. We can get more comfortable with that. And we can learn how to hold space for that uncertainty in different ways. We don't always have to feel like we have to battle. I love to talk about the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, who is, he was asked once, how do you foster compassion for people who have wronged you in the past? And he says, by practicing and meditating on the idea of compassion every day. He's been doing it for like 60 years, And the point isn't to be like him. The point is that it takes practice. He still gets irritated, but he has a resource that has built up over time for him not to stay there. And so that's how we undo this bias knot that we all have, through practice. Thank y'all. I appreciate your time today. And I hope and I pray that this has been worth your time and informative. Let's see.
Thank you, Michael. We so appreciate all of the learning and the practical tools that you gave to everyone today. And we want to open it up at this point. We have some time for some questions. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat or the Q&A. I do see one, just more of a thank you. So any questions that anyone may have, if you want to put it in the Q&A or the chat. And while we're waiting for that session, Michael, I'll take the liberty since I have it here. You talked about the importance of practice, and I think that's the critical piece of that. I mean, we've got some good information. It's just like anything else in life. There is repetition. You really kind of have to do the work. And so maybe can you talk a bit more about that and how people really can do that on a daily basis? I think that's the big piece for folks, is finding the time to really do the work.
Yes, man, that in today's world, like when can we find the time? I just met with somebody last night who is a trauma therapist, and she talked about the idea of decolonizing. We're over scheduled already. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't know if I want to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to fit this into my schedule. I have a 4-year-old daughter. She's not, she's not letting daddy meditate. She does. She actually does. She's good about that. But what I would recommend is, instead of thinking about this as something that needs to be, I think it is important for us to have a daily practice, 5 or 10 minutes, maybe at the start of your lunch period, you pull away from the laptop and you just say, I'm just going to sit here in silence for 5 minutes. I've made it a practice. Whenever I come into the office, I close my office door and I sit for 10 minutes, regardless of what's going on. Like, I know I have a lot of stuff to do. I know that there's an email waiting. I know I have things to turn in. I know I have a project going, but I just stop for 10 minutes before I start my day. Especially now that we've had this, we used to, and we're getting more into the routine of this as folks start going back into the offices and start going back to work and things like this. But during the height of the pandemic, we lost a lot of that, that natural, in our day. I wouldn't say natural, but just sort of the times in the day that we would have, like in our commute, to just sort of settle in, to the day, or like just have a quiet time to ourselves. Maybe we're singing a song for us, what I'm saying? But when everything was happening in the house, we lost some of that. And so baking that into the things that we already do, 1 minute, 2 minutes, because it draws you. It's like taking a cold drink or something on a hot day. You may just need one sip to get you going, but over time, we will make the time. We'll make the time if we see the benefit of it. I would say start with 1 minute. Don't try to sit down for 2 hours or something like that, because it'll be too irritating. 1 minute, and then see where it goes from there.
Absolutely. That is some good practical advice. If we don't consciously set some time aside, and I like that practice of the 10 minutes before you get started, because once the day gets moving, to find that time can be difficult. So at the beginning of the day, I have a calendar in my office that has daily affirmations and scriptures, and that's one of the practices I have, is reading that before I turn on my computer, start looking at emails, start going about the day. I really do try to set that moment apart to do it, because I find if I don't, by the end of the day, I'm like, oh man, I really wish I would have done that. And a lot of times those scriptures are words of encouragement that I may need. I may not actually need it at that moment, but as I go throughout the day, I refer back to that. Wow, that's why I had that scripture this morning. And that was to help me at that particular moment during the day. So thank you for that. Yeah, go right ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that we will often think about those things as distractions, I think, from the day. Like, especially if we get so sort of caught up in, I got to get the things done, I got to get work, I got to get work done. But we're not machines. And we, our first purpose on the planet, right, is to be human. And so those sorts of things, like you just mentioned, right, connecting to, I honestly like to think about it like a well. It's like this is what I need to dip into in order to be able to give of myself. And that is it's just as important as the food I feel like I need to fuel my body, that cup of coffee that's keeping me awake, right? Those things are that spiritual fuel we need to keep showing up, because when that's depleted, again, that's when the body starts to shut down. The body says, no, we can't do this anymore, because there's no other, we are, we might feel that sense of, collapse. So going back to the well as resource is really important. Thank you for talking even about your own practice.
Yes. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. We have one from Terry that says, how do you incorporate identifying the different types of biases, diagnoses, availability, affinity, confirmation in your practice? Is it important to reflect on that when thinking about personal biases?
I think that, yeah, I think for us, the more that we can be intentional and specific about what we are dealing with, the better. One of the reasons why I talk about those different forms is so that we can start to see that it comes in different forms, that it's not just prejudice that I have about somebody because of their race, for instance, right? It can be my brain and is constantly thinking about preference. That's why I was using that term a lot, as preference. And depending on our jobs or our relationships, we can be, I think, knowing. Let me pause and say, I don't think it's necessarily important to have like a running list and it may be too much for us to hold, right? Knowing that you have unconscious bias is enough, okay? Just to be clear. But the more specific we can get about the ones that we succumb to the most often can help us whenever we're faced with decisions, and whenever we're in situations where we want to make sure that we're making a decision that is as conscious as possible, in line with equity, in line with our inclusive values as possible. We're not going to get it right all the time, right? And knowing specifically, for instance, that I'm succumbing right now to availability bias might not help, but it is good for us to know that we have the capacity at any time to fall victim to any one of these types, these forms.
Thank you. And we do have a comment in the chat from Marilyn. Says that the 846 series is one of the most uplifting, encouraging, and hopeful things I've engaged in the last 18 months. Thank you, Marilyn, for that. When we started this journey 18 months ago, wow, it's amazing. Our purpose really at the time was to educate our community around the issue of systemic racism. We know that there are those who believe that it does not exist. And so the groundwater approach through Racial Equity Institute was that instrument that we use to educate. And so from that, there are so many questions. I said this in the beginning, where people seem to want more. Everyone was grappling with all the civil unrest that we had. And certainly the George Floyd murder was a catalyst for much of that. But people just wanted to have additional dialogue and conversation. So that's what we are endeavoring to do here, is to create a platform for anyone in our community to join us and to have discussion, and to give, practical ways that we as individuals, we have to certainly deal with self first, right? Before we can impact change in the community, and to give those tools, for people to use in dealing with some of the issues that we have here in our community. So thank you, Marilyn, for your great feedback and support. And we encourage you to share with folks that all of our past series are on our website. It's some rich materials. You can use it as points of conversation within your organization or even in your homes. And so certainly this is one of those. And so we have another, Michael, you put in there the book. Someone asked a question about the book. And so we have that. And so if there are no more questions from our audience here today, we're going to then go ahead and wrap up. And so after this seminar here today, you'll receive an email, a survey, and that's how we form the future panels that we have. We have one actually coming up this Saturday that's focused on our youth and their ability to participate in the conversation around equity and and inclusion and diversity. And we want to make sure that we're giving our young people a platform to participate. So that'll be this Saturday morning. You can go to our website. It's not too late to register. And we have another session coming up also in November. So please check our website to find all that information. But most importantly, please take advantage of the survey. It's real brief that you'll receive after this webinar, and you'll also receive a reminder in a couple of days to take advantage of that survey, so we'll know what more we need to talk about for future webinars that we want to host. So Michael, any final thoughts that you have for those who are participating?
I just thank you all for your time today and for committing to being a part of this process. This endeavor is one that is, I am just so grateful for the 846 series in the sense that it's going to take much more, a lifetime for us to really work and create the type of world that we all hope for. And doing this work right here, spending an hour together today is one more step forward and seeing that world manifest. And so I'm grateful to each and every person on the call, those who are going to watch the rebroadcast, all that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you again, everyone, for your participation today. We so appreciate you being here with us and taking time out of your day. And again, go to our website, the YMCA of Greensboro, to look at future sessions, past sessions, and we look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and God bless.